What's up, everyone? Today I'm going to be going through the statistics of all the close range weapons and try to help define the true close range meta for Season 2.5, Season 2 Reloaded. If you're here watching one of my videos, there's a good chance that you're a highly competitive Warzone player who takes the game pretty seriously, and I think you're really going to be interested in our sponsor, Repeat.gg. Repeat.gg is an esports tournament platform that runs a ton of Warzone tournaments. Most of the tournaments that they run have a really big prize pool. You can see on here $5,000, $3,000, $2,500, and they're all free to enter right now. They have multiple tournaments running at any given time. Sometimes it'll be Resurgence maps, sometimes it'll be Battle Royale, so you can pick and choose if you're someone who likes to play the small maps or the big maps. You'll have all those options available to you on this site. You can enter as many of these tournaments as you want, so all these free entry tournaments, if they're running during the same time period on the same map, that is completely fine. So you could sign up for multiple, and then if you had a really good game, that would count for all of those tournaments, not just one of them. So I think that's pretty cool that you can, just sign up for as many as you want. It is super easy to get into these tournaments. All you have to do is create the Repeat.gg account and then connect your Call of Duty account to the Repeat.gg account. And then all of your matches will be automatically tracked, so you don't have to do anything. It's all done for you. And then all you do is between the dates of the tournament, say March 7th to April 7th, that's when the tournament runs, just play as many games as you can, and it'll use your absolute top games to score you for the tournament. For each tournament, there's a live leaderboard, so you can just come to this page and see how you're doing compared to everyone else. Another thing I thought was really cool is you can connect your Twitch account to your Repeat.gg account, and you will show up as one of the streamers competing in this tournament over on the right, so that's a way people can actually discover your stream. I genuinely think this is a really cool opportunity to get in there and win some money playing Warzone. I think competition by itself is fun. It gives you a purpose rather than just playing to play. And these are all free entries, so why not? Just get in there, sign up for these tournaments, and have the potential to win some money playing Warzone. Big thanks to Repeat.gg for sponsoring this video. If you guys want to check them out, sign up for some of these free tournaments. The link to their website is down in the video description as well as the pinned comment. Alright guys, we're going to do this the old-fashioned way this time. So I'm going to use the best stat tool on TGD and then other tools as well to help kind of figure out what the meta is. So if you don't know what best stat tool is, it basically lets you look up like every combination of attachments for a specific stat, and it'll rank them in order, including all the attachments and how that works. So we're looking at SMGs today. So we're going to add SMGs. I'm just going to add all of the SMGs in the game. So they're all added to my little search here. And then TTK tends to be like the most important thing for SMGs, just because, accuracy is not as important because you're so close range that, recoil is not that big of a deal. Now, obviously there's exceptions to that rule, and some engagements are a little longer, but in general, to find the close range meta, you pretty much want to start with the TTK. So we're going to do TTK, 300 health at 8 meters, and then combination. So we're doing 15% head, 5% neck, etc. all the way down. We're going to include open bolt delay, and then we're just going to calculate. And you will see that this spits out the TTK at 8 meters for the combination shot percentage for all these weapons. So we have the AMR9 at 576 in first place, the RAM9 at 585 in second place, HRM-9 at 612 in third place, and then Striker 9 at 630 in fourth behind the AMR9 with the Jack Etten double barrel kit. And then after that, the WSP9 is down here at 654. That's because it has an open bolt delay, so we'll be looking at that as well on the charts. Next up, I'm going to go over to the TTK chart and kind of compare how these all line up on the actual chart so you can see damage ranges and things like that. Obviously, that TTK lookup only shows you at a specific range, so exactly 8 meters it shows the TTK for all these weapons. TTK chart shows much more information. It shows you how it changes over that distance. So looking at this right away, we see the AMR in orange here, which had the fastest TTK, also has by far the longest damage range, all the way out to 23 meters, just an insane damage range for an SMG. But there's more to that, so hold that thought. It's not like overpoweringly good or anything like that. The RAM9 in the blue color here only goes out to 10 meters, but it does have the second fastest time to kill, and you'll see as we talk about some other things that it's a very big player in the meta. HRM9 is red in third place in that first damage range. It is just a very consistent weapon. It's probably the one that feels the most consistent of all the top SMGs right now. I think that's just because of the way the visual recoil and the mobility and sprint to fire and things line up. So again, we're going to look at those stats in a second. WSP9 is green here, so it looks like it's pretty slow, but if you turn off open bolt delay, then it gets really fast. It goes all the way down to 600 milliseconds of TTK in that first damage range, with a lot more damage range than some of the other options, and it has excellent sprint to fire and mobility, so it's really not a bad option. The one thing that holds it back is it has a slow fire rate, and over time we have learned that slow fire rates are kind of unforgiving. They kind of make it so they kind of make it so if you miss a bullet, as soon as you come back on the target, it takes longer for the next bullet to get off and fire. So that means that there's like an extra delay there. If you had one more bullet to kill someone, it takes longer for slower fire rate weapons. They just feel much more unforgiving. And that's the thought process behind why that might be. But yeah, it does have an open bolt delay. So if you include open bolt delay, basically the open bolt delay just means that there's a delay between when you pull the trigger and when the bullet actually is fired compared to the other weapons. So it has that, and in some situations that's important. So if you both see each other at the same time, you both pull the trigger at the same time, then yes, that should be included in the TTK. But if it's a situation where they don't see you or you fire first and then they become aware of you, then it doesn't really matter in that situation, because they all they're reacting to is getting shot. They're not reacting to seeing you. So it's kind of important in some cases, not important in other cases. Last up, the Striker 9 in yellow here. It's the slowest time to kill of these top 5 weapons, unless you include open bolt delay on the WSP, and then that is a little bit slower. But it's still pretty fast. It's still 630. That's about 55 milliseconds slower than the fastest on this chart, which is the AMR. So if you actually start this chart with Y at 0 instead of Y like auto scaled, you can see that these are all pretty close, but you can definitely feel these differences in game. All right, so I'm going to toggle some of the including stats down below. So we have ADS time and sprint to fire time. So if we toggle sprint to fire time to be included, you're going to see that the AMR, the orange, goes from being the absolute best to the absolute worst. And that is one of the things that really holds this back. It just has really bad sprint to fire time. And again, 95% of you probably know, but sprint to fire time is just the time from when you're sprinting to when you press the trigger. There's a delay to when the first bullet is fired. And they do that to kind of balance the weapons. SMGs tend to have much lower sprint to fire times. ARs tend to have much higher. Well, for some reason, the AMR9 has like assault rifle sprint to fire times, and that's kind of how they're balancing it. So if you play really slow and you don't sprint around a lot, the AMR is going to be awesome for you. But if you're an aggressive player, the AMR is going to feel really slow, really heavy, and it's definitely not going to be as good as some of these other options. You can see the HRM actually goes from last place to first place on this chart, just including sprint to fire time. So that's another one of the reasons that really good players like this, is because really good players tend to play really aggressive, and you need that sprint to fire time. It ends up making the gun actually kill faster in the situations where it's dangerous and you can actually die. Like when you both see each other at the same time, you're both sprinting, you both try to shoot, the HRM sprint to fire time can really save you in those situations. And you can see the WSP actually, when I toggle this, even including that open bolt delay, the WSP, the green line here, goes from being the worst to one of the fastest. It's just a little bit slower than the Striker 9 when sprint to fire is included. Striker 9 is another good example of this. They've kind of balanced these weapons with sprint to fire and ADS more so than they did in Warzone 1. Warzone 1 was mostly, they were all the same sprint to fire or very close. And Warzone 2, Warzone 3, where we are now, they're using sprint to fire and ADS time to balance the weapons a lot more. So we have more unique damage profiles, which I think is a good thing. It gives us more variation and more potential to have a larger pool of weapons in the meta. So if I turn on sprint to fire, include sprint to fire, the 2 best become the 2 worst. The AMR9 and the RAM9, the whole chart basically just inverts itself. And the 2 best, the AMR9, RAM9 become the 2 worst. We have the HRM in first, the Striker in second, and then the WSP in third. If I turn off open bolt delay, so if you're sprinting and open bolt delay doesn't matter and you try to fire, all of a sudden the WSP9 becomes the fastest to kill. The one thing that holds the WSP back, specifically for like mouse and key players, is that slow fire rate. So it's not going to be quite as good as these other options in my opinion, and it's mostly just because of that fire rate. So turning off sprint to fire and turning on ADS, toggling this, you can see that a similar thing happens. The AMR9 has a slower ADS time, so situations where you're not sprinting and you need to ADS onto the target, which is most fights, including ADS here, you can see that the AMR gets much slower. The WSP9 gets a little bit slower, and the RAM9 actually has very fast ADS. So the RAM9 gets quite a bit better and comes out on top in this scenario. So this is kind of how I figure out the meta most of the time, is I'll use these different tools to try to analyze things and understand how they work. So now that we've looked at just the base weapons, we're going to go look at the TTK forgiveness in that first damage range. All right, so this is another feature on TGD called the STK calculator. This is what we use to really help understand how the forgiveness of the weapons line up. So what this does is you select your shot location, your health, and then the damage range you want to look at, and it will show you basically off of the shot location you selected. So chest shot is our default shot location. it'll show you how hitting different shot locations actually can change that TTK. So in this case, chest shot is 10 shots to kill. It does 320 damage. So if you get 4 headshots and 5 chest shots, then you'll do exactly 300 damage and reduce your TTK by reducing that shots to kill by 1. So it takes 4 headshots in the first damage range, with the rest being chest shots to reduce that TTK. So not going to happen hardly ever. You're very rarely going to get 4 headshots in a fight. All right, so what I've done is I've opened what I think are the top 3 SMGs from doing that TTK analysis. We got the HRM-9 on the left, the AMR9 in the middle, and then the RAM9 on the right. They love those 3-letter names with the 9 afterwards. Not really sure why that is. I mean, the 9 I'm sure is for 9mm, but the naming is a little bit annoying to me. But anyway, so HRM-9, this is the one I was using as the example. So it does 32 to the chest. TTK is 10 shots, so 612 milliseconds with its fire rate. It takes 4 headshots to reduce that. So it's going to be really rare. You're almost never going to get 4 headshots as you're firing at someone. So unlikely to ever reduce this TTK down to 544 milliseconds. The AMR9, 34 chest damage, 9 shots to kill, 576 millisecond TTK. But if you hit 3 stomach shots, or upper leg, or lower arm, your TTK actually gets worse. So it goes up to 648 if you just miss 3 of those chest shots onto the stomach. So that's going to be reasonably common. That's not going to be something that's like super rare to actually happen. So yeah, that's something that you should consider, even though it has a really long damage range. Like we said, it goes out to 22 meters. For that first damage range, it just isn't going to be as forgiving. And then the same is true when you look at chest shots versus headshots. So it takes 5 headshots off of the chest or neck to actually reduce that TTK down to 504 milliseconds. So most of the time you're going to get 576, but it's going to be relatively common that you get 648 because of that unforgiving, stomach, upper leg, lower leg, and how the damages line up there. And then on the right, the RAM9 actually performs exceptionally well. It does 33 to the chest and 30 to the upper leg or lower leg. So you will always, you can never not get 585 or better TTK with the RAM9. So that's what this is saying. It says 10 shots to kill stomach, 10 shots to kill upper leg, lower leg. So anywhere on the body, you're always going to get 585 milliseconds, or you can actually reduce that with only 1 headshot. So the RAM9 with only 1 headshot goes down to 520 milliseconds. So in that first damage range, it is just TTK wise, it is by far the best of these 3 weapons. You can reduce the TTK and your TTK can never be increased, which is similar to the HRM9. It can never be increased, but it's just much harder to reduce that TTK using headshots. So that's the big difference between the HRM and the RAM. I want to quickly mention the WSP as well because it is in a pretty good spot. It's just unforgiving because of that slow fire rate. But in the first range, the TTK forgiveness is okay. So it's going to take 6 stomach shots or upper leg, lower leg off of chest to increase your TTK. So that's going to be not super common. Like that's a lot of shots off the chest. It's possible for sure, but it's not going to be super common. And then same for the headshot reduction. So it takes 3 shots to reduce 3 headshots to reduce the TTK down to 500 milliseconds from 600. So that's not going to be super common either. Hitting 3 out of your 6 total shots on the head is probably not super likely. Getting into the builds for these weapons, I don't know if the community already knew this or not, but I definitely did not. I know that when the game came out, this was not the case. So I was messing with this and I was trying to get the recoil on the HRM to be a little bit better. And I know that the Zeman 35 compensated flash hider is super popular right now, and I was confused why. It does have firing aim stability, which is very important. That reduces your visual recoil and kind of tightens up the pattern a little bit. But overall, compared to like this trebuchet break, this has 10% penalty to your damage range, which is obviously not insignificant, but you get an extra 25% gun kick and horizontal recoil. So I was confused why people weren't using this attachment more compared to the compensated flash hider. But I discovered, or I learned, I don't know how long it's been this way. Again, I know it was not this way when the game came out. There was no difference between the muzzles in terms of muzzle smoke and muzzle flash when the game came out. But if you look at this, in a dark room like this, I have no muzzle smoke, no muzzle flash at all using this compensated flash hider, which makes sense because it's a flash hider. It's just never been that way before. But if you go back and you add this trebuchet break, you will see that all of a sudden I have massive muzzle flash and smoke, and it's just much harder to see your target. So that's one of those kind of intangible things that really does make a big difference, especially in dark areas. It's already hard enough in this game to see your target in dark areas. So that isn't something to keep in mind. And also, pretty much all the compensators, muzzle brakes, those all have pretty bad muzzle flash and muzzle smoke. But the flash hiders, so the Zemin compensated flash hider, and then the other flash hiders over on the right, like the Spiral V3, and then all the suppressors also have that same effect, that they're basically flash hiders, and they completely make that muzzle flash go away, as well as the muzzle smoke. So that's actually a pretty big deal. Kind of a big old buff to all those attachments that, at least when the game came out, they were not that way. So at some point, they've been changed. And I don't know if you guys knew about this. Let me know in the comments if you knew this, because I had not heard this. I didn't know this changed, but it's actually a pretty big deal. So keeping that in mind, we're going to build these weapons the best we can. I'm going to do the top three. We're going to start with the HRM-9. So I try to build these weapons to compensate for their downfalls. So the HRM doesn't have any issues with, ADS time or sprint to fire time, but in my opinion, the recoil is not great. So I like to be able to hit this pretty consistently, hit this second target in the firing range. It's about 20 meters away. And these engagements definitely happen with SMGs. It's definitely more common to be like inside about, I don't know, probably like 13 meters is where a big drop off is in the engagements. But 20 meters happens, and I think you need to be able to hit those shots. And also just having that better recoil does help in the closer engagements. It's just not nearly as important. So the HRM, when I shoot this by default, it just it's got a lot of gun kick, and it kind of bounces to the left a little bit, which can make it kind of, I can correct for it, but when I correct for it, then I kind of start missing right. So we're going to keep that in mind as we build it. All right, so starting with stock, the folding light stock, minus 14% horizontal, vertical, and gun kick, minus 9% on gun kick, for only a 4% ADS penalty. So that is an extremely valuable attachment for at least my own personal build, where I like to make the recoil a little better. 50 round drum, always, we're going for the big damage per mag. It has good iron sights. I don't really think it needs an optic. Even on mouse and key, I think you can get away without using an optic. Another attachment that's really, really good is this DR6 hand stop. Just has awesome stats. We don't care about hip fire very much on this, or tack stance for this specific gun and build, but it helps with your sprint to fire, ADS, and your movement speed. So that's a really, really good attachment. So we're going to throw that on there for now. And then there's two really good barrels for this. So we have the Thorn 90 barrel. This is more of a SMG-like barrel. It makes it a little faster, makes it quicker to ADS and move around. Very good barrel there, with only a 5 to 6% penalty to your recoil, which, again, the recoil to me doesn't feel great on this, and I like to be able to hit that 20-meter target. So I do think this is a great choice. Don't get me wrong. If you're an aggressive player, I think the Thorn 90 is probably the correct choice. But if you're a little slower player and you want to be able to take those fights at a little bit longer ranges with your SMG, I think the Princeps long barrel is probably a little bit better for most people. I think the average player is not going to be pushing buildings and things like the Thorn 90 barrel is built for. So I think the Princeps for most people, but if you're a really aggressive player, go with the Thorn 90. The Princeps also has that advantage of giving those really good iron sights. So I'll hop in the firing range here. You can see it has basically the old Grau iron sights. So that's a nice little, intangible benefit to the Princeps. And then for the last attachment, I think there's three great options here. So number one, just the Shadow Strike suppressor. So this has no negatives in any way. It just keeps you off the minimap, and it removes that muzzle flash that we just talked about and muzzle smoke. So it's easier to see your target. So that is a great attachment. Always has been. It's just simple. Doesn't do a lot. And then I think the Trebuchet Brake and the Zemin 35 compensated flash hider are both great. You need to decide which is more important to you. So because this build has the Princeps long barrel, that gives us 25% extra damage range. So the reduction of 10% from the Trebuchet Brake, not that big of a deal. And it gives us much better recoil. So I think if you're not pushing buildings very much, this is going to be the one that you want, the Trebuchet Brake for sure. Just because you don't care about muzzle flash as much. Muzzle flash is only important in dark areas, and this is going to make it much more accurate. So even though you're losing 10% damage range, the added accuracy of the gun kick that you get versus the compensated flash hider and the horizontal recoil benefit, I think are worth it. Now, if you're a more aggressive player, I think the Zemin compensated flash hider probably is the way to go. It gets that the flash hider effect where you can't see those muzzle flashes anymore, and just makes it really easy to see your target while you're shooting indoors, and just a perfectly clear picture of your target. So I think those three options are all great. kind of build it for how you know that you like to play. That's kind of what I'm trying to do here, is give you guys every option to decide for yourself. I think those 3 attachments are good, and the 2 barrels are very good. All right, on to the AMR9 now. So if we remember correctly, the AMR9 had great numbers everywhere except terrible sprint to fire and terrible ADS. So we're going to try to deal with those with the attachments, but I also want to check out the recoil here and see how it feels. So I would say it feels about the same as the HRM to me. It has kind of a little zigzag in the middle, but even with no attachments, I can pretty well hit this target. The zigzag isn't big enough to start missing shots at about 20 meters that often, so I don't think recoil is going to be hugely important, but it is something to consider. All right, so AMR9, right off the bat, big weakness, sprint to fire time, and it has 1 attachment that's awesome for this. The Phantom Grip. This is a rear grip, minus 8% ADS, so it helps with your ADS, and your sprint to fire 20%. So this is an absolute must-use attachment for the AMR9. Next attachment that I think is pretty much integral to the AMR9 is the Tectonic Micro Integral Suppressor. So this helps with ADS time, sprint to fire time, hurts your damage range 10%, but we literally don't care about that. It also helps with movement speed, plus 2% movement, plus 3% ADS movement. But the damage range is so long on this, so the negatives literally don't matter. It's already twice as long as any other SMG pretty much. So just anything that can help with that sprint to fire and ADS speed, as well as getting the weapon suppressed so we stay out the minimap. It's just a great attachment with basically no downsides for this weapon. All right, unfortunately, the iron sights are pretty terrible on the AMR9, so we are going to use the Mark III reflector optic. I don't think even controller players are going to want to use the irons. It's just very important to be able to see what you're shooting at, even on controller. So I do think that that is, worth using the Mark III reflector. And then last up, we're still trying to get that sprint to fire and ADS time down. They're still too high. So we are going to use the DR6 hand stop. That's going to give us better mobility. It's going to reduce the ADS speed and sprint to fire time to a point where it's at least competitive with the other weapons. It's still going to be a little bit worse. It's going to be about 20 milliseconds, 30 milliseconds worse than most of the other weapons we're building here. But the TTK for this weapon was about 55, 50-ish milliseconds better than the other weapons. So if we can get them close, then I really do think this is one of the best SMGs in the game right now. It does have a little slower fire rate, I think, than some of the others, so it might not be quite as forgiving in those cases. But this is the final build here. I think it's very, very good and makes the weapon play much more like an SMG than it did originally. So much better movement speed. ADS movement speed is excellent. Recoil is okay. It's not great. We unfortunately didn't have an attachment slot to use for recoil like I wanted to, as we talked about in the start of this weapon. But you can get used to this, and it does have a little zigzag, so it's not going to be super competitive at longer ranges, but up close, it's going to be really good, and it has such a long damage range that that's going to be a big advantage out there at those longer 15 to 20 meter engagements. Last up here, we're going to do the RAM-9. Based on its stats, this is the one that I would be trying the most to learn how to use, just because in that first damage range, only needing 1 headshot to reduce your TTK off of the chest, and then never being able to increase it, that is just the potential to absolutely fry people in that first damage range. So we're going to check out the recoil first of all again. 30 meter target. Definitely pulls hard to the right and then comes back to the left. So that's going to be something to keep in mind as I'm building this. So let's see, second try here. Little extra recoil control. It's not bad. It's not bad. And it's pulling up and to the right long enough before it comes back to the left that you can probably down people most of the time before you even have to start changing the direction of your recoil control. So it's pretty manageable. If I had to rate it compared to the other two, I'd actually say it's very similar, maybe slightly worse, just a touch worse than the HRM and the AMR. So the downfalls of the RAM-9, it had bad sprint to fire, pretty okay ADS time, but just really bad sprint to fire. So if we can reduce the sprint to fire and help that recoil a little bit, this gun is going to be excellent. So those are going to be our 2 goals as we're building this. So keeping all the weaknesses of the RAM-9 in mind, we're going to try to build this, compensate for those weaknesses, and try to make it the best that we can. 50 round mag, of course, for the trios and quads matches. For muzzle, so this has pretty bad recoil, like we said. There's going to be a few good options here. Spiral flash hider is pretty good, plus 9% ADS time, but this has really good ADS time, you'll see as we actually get this built out. So I'm going to leave the muzzle for now. We'll come back to that. DR6 hand stop is a no-brainer, 9% ADS speed and 8% sprint to fire. You're going to find that it's harder to get the sprint to fire down on the RAM-9 compared to the AMR9, and that is just because it doesn't have that rear grip that does 20%. So we're going to use a rear grip This does 10%, which is significant, but it does pretty dramatically hurt our recoil control. So we're gonna have to compensate for that because it already didn't have great recoil, but we have to get that sprint to fire time down for those close range engagements. We're going to use the Recon comb for -18% and then -2%. It's going to slow our ADS movement down, but you can see the Ram-9 already had like the fastest ADS movement of any of these guns, so that doesn't matter so much. So we're going to use the Recon comb there, and then we have one attachment left. And if I take this into the firing range right now, how it's built, very snappy, but the recoil is just, I mean, it's doable, but it's just not great. So I do think we need to really get that recoil down with an attachment. So there's a few good options here. The Xenom compensated flash hider. That's such a hard thing to say. Like, why is it named that? This is great because it gets that muzzle flash gone. Only 5% penalty to ADS, 15% vertical, 5% horizontal. But to me, it really, the horizontal is the big problem with this gun. So I think that it's worth considering potentially something that's going to hurt the weapon more. So like the Spiral V3.5 flash hider with 13% horizontal might be worth considering, or even going something like Lacerda compensator. So it's going to bring your ADS time up quite a bit, but it's going to make this thing so much more accurate that in a lot of cases I think it's going to be worth it. And this allows you to have really good sprint to fire time using the attachments we have. So yeah, the ADS time is not great, but it's very accurate now compared to what it would have been without that. If you want a middle ground, I would go with the Spiral V3.5 flash hider. That's going to give you a little better ADS, but it's not going to have anywhere near as easy recoil. Still pretty good though. I would say that feels very, very usable. 217 millisecond ADS, that's right in line with the other weapons, so you're not going to be at a disadvantage there. And we were able to get the sprint to fire time down all the way to 122 milliseconds. So this would probably be the build I would recommend. Just think it's a very, very good gun all around, and I would probably personally be trying to use this instead of the other options, but the other options do have those benefits, especially the AMR with its crazy long damage range. The HRM is just really good all around, just a stable, consistent weapon. So I think those are the top three, but I do have one more build that I want to build for you here. For me, playing on mouse and key, close range engagements have always been very difficult compared to controller without that aim assist. And something that's kind of saved it for me is TAQ stance. So I probably started using TAQ stance a couple months ago. And if you don't know what it is, it's basically like super hip fire. So you move very quickly. It gives you a really small hip fire cone essentially. And the Ram-9 is perfect for it. So with the default weapon with no attachments, it's pretty good and easily accurate enough to use at 10 meters, but we do want to make it the TAQ stance a little bit better with attachments. So we're going to build it specifically for TAQ stance. And I think this thing in TAQ stance is just incredible. And TAQ stance is okay on controller, but it really shines on mouse and key. All right, so first attachment. Because we're in TAQ stance, they made some changes to how it functions behind the scenes in a recent update, and you basically just don't have recoil when you're in TAQ stance anymore. So we don't care about recoil at all anymore with this build. So the first thing we're going to do is put on this FSS Imperator Light Barrel. This is 20% damage range, 20% bullet velocity, hurts your recoil, but actually increases your movement speed and doesn't hurt anything else. You still have fast ADS time with a 20% bonus to your damage range. So that is huge. So the Ram-9's bad sprint to fire time still does need to be dealt with, because it doesn't matter if you're hip firing, TAQ stance firing, ADS firing, sprint to fire is always the same between all of those. So we have to reduce that still, as well as reducing the TAQ stance spread. So that's what we're going to look for here. The Haste XV rear grip, this does a bunch of TAQ stance spread, helps your sprint to fire, and helps your ADS movement. And I did do testing on this. ADS movement speed is the thing that scales with TAQ stance movement speed. So it's not like regular movement speed is what you're looking for. You want ADS movement speed if you want to be a zoomy boy while you're doing the TAQ stance builds. So onto the stock here, we're going to go with the motion TAQ pad. This does TAQ stance, ADS speed, and sprint to fire speed, exactly what we're looking for again. And then last up, if you want to stay off the minimap, this is absolutely good enough TAQ spread to just use the Shadow Strike suppressor. But if you don't really care about that and you want to be a little more aggressive, I think the X10 TX12 hand stop is probably the best option. This gives you better sprint to fire again and better TAQ stance spread. So you're going to be a little more effective at longer ranges in TAQ stance with this, and a little more effective up close because of the sprint to fire time benefits. So I think that is probably what I would use there. And then if I take this into the firing range, you're going to see TAQ stance spread is really small, and it basically instantly gets to that minimum size when you ADS or whatever you want to call it. And it's just super accurate, and I have no problem even hitting that target at 20 meters. So again, this has kind of almost saved the input for me. So I love using TAQ Sense on mouse and key. It feels like it kind of narrows the gap a little bit between controller and mouse and key up close. So highly recommend giving this a try. Maybe even if you're on controller, you should try this out and see how it feels to you. All right, guys, that's it for the video. This was a very long one, but I think it was one of the best videos I've made in a long time, with a lot of really good explanations of how to build things and, you know, how all of these stats work together, even intangible stats. As always, the best way to support is just a direct subscription through TGD. You get access to all these tools that I use to help find the meta, and it can let you, you know, find your own meta. You can use the tools, the 2TTK simulation, best stat tool, STK calculator, all these things in combination to really understand, you know, what makes a weapon the best in the game, and it can really help you figure out what you should be using. But I just appreciate you guys for supporting in any way, whether you're just watching the videos. You know, I appreciate you no matter what. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.